Welcome to today's program of the Sousa Mendes Foundation. The topic of today's program is Aristides de Sousa Mendes, our hero, to whom our foundation has been dedicated for the last 10 years. Today, we have a co-host for the program. Her name is Joan Arne Halpern. She has written a beautiful book called My Sister's Eyes, a family chronicle of rescue and loss during World War II. Joan Halpern is one of the people that you saw in the film, and so you're going to meet her in person. She's going to tell you about her story. She's going to introduce our speakers for today, and she will take it from here. So Joan, how are you?
Oh, I'm fabulous, Olivia. Thank you and welcome everyone. Today, I'll be in conversation with SEMYON Pinkhasov, the creator of With God Against Man, the film that you have just seen, and Professor and Sousa Mendes Foundation board member, Mordechai Paul Dio. He was formerly at Yad Vashem for 24 years, where he directed the Righteous Among the Nations department. SEMYON, how are you? It's nice for you to be here today.
Thank you, John. I'm happy to be here with you again.
Thank you, SEMYON. I'd like to say just one thing to open this program. Thanksgiving is a time when families usually get together to give thanks for the things that they're grateful for in their lives. And how fitting that your film, SEMYON, opens with Leon Moe's words spoken at the United Nations in 2013. He said, "I owe my life and that of my family to having been rescued by Aristides de Sousa Mendes." That's a particularly fitting opening for this weekend and the opening to your film, don't you think, SEMYON?
This is very fitting, very, very, very fitting. And I'm glad Olivia told me about his presentation at the United Nations, where I came and was able to get his speech on a tape, and I used that tape to begin and to end the film.
Exactly. So With God Against Man has had its own journey, SEMYON. Isn't that correct? The premiere was at the Center of Jewish History in 2000, what was it, 14 or 15? I don't remember. And then in Israel, it's been shown in Israel, in Moscow, New Jersey, and most recently in Buenos Aires. Phew!
And at Cardozo Law School too.
And at Cardozo Law School too. Yes, that's a lot. That's a lot of showing, SEMYON. I think you should be real happy about that. Okay, I'd like to talk a little bit about you, SEMYON, before we get into the film more deeply. Your bio on our event page tells us that you were born in the Soviet Union and that you immigrated to the United States in 1977, and also that you are a championship fencer and the coach to the US and Maccabiah Teams. But right now, I'd like our audience to get a little bit of what I know more about you. So Matt, please, will you?
Maccabiah Games gives you identity. They brings you together. You know you're not alone even if you're surrounded by hostile environment. In Russian, where I was born and grew up, I knew I was Jewish, but I didn't know what does it mean to be Jewish, because I didn't have any Jewish education. It was discouraged. My parents didn't speak the language. They were not religious. They were scared of everything because they were Jewish. Then once I had the international event, and I had to fence against a decent guy, good fencer, but he was from Germany. And then something kicked into my mind. And I said, although he was good, I said, I can't afford to lose it. I remember that. I have to do something. And I won the bout. I guess that was the first time when I felt why I'm doing it. Certain things happened politically in the Soviet Union and in the world. And the treatment of Israel by the Soviet government was so outrageous to me that I couldn't continue to live in that country anymore. It was a purely political decision. So we took our chance. We applied, my wife and I, and our 2-year-old son at that time, we applied for immigration, and we were lucky we were allowed to leave the country. But I had to pay a price. I stopped my medical education. And that was difficult, but I knew what I was doing. And as a result, we came to New York in January 1977. When you live in a country like the Soviet Union at that time, and you begin to know your history, and you begin to learn history of your people, and then you know that there is another community in Israel or in the United States, and you feel like there is a gap between you and them. There's an ocean, or whatever you call it. This gap is so big, you can't build a bridge over it. And then suddenly you find yourself, you're able to build that bridge. Maccabiah Games was the other end of that bridge. I made it.
So now we know a little bit about you and the things that are important to you. So what brought you to explore the Sousa Mendes story?
My wife and I, we were in Portugal, and on our last day in Lisbon, she brought my attention to a poster on the wall, a poster of a middle-aged man with a lot of white hair, and in the caption it says, Aristides de Sousa Mendes saved the thousands of people during the war in Europe. And I, who always thought of myself that I'm very much familiar with Holocaust, was surprised because I never heard his name. So when we came back, I did some research and I found a lot of information about Sousa Mendes and also about the Sousa Mendes Foundation. And then I called and I spoke to Olivia Matis, and she told me about a United Nations seminar on Holocaust where Helene Mayer was speaking, and then about the voyage to Europe to recreate that route of refugees in 1939, 1940 from France through Spain to Portugal and farther. And of course, I signed in right away. You know, I became a part of that group of people who were children at that time during the war, or descendants of those who had this unfortunate experience.
Mm-hmm. So you decided right away you wanted to do a
Right
documentary about it.
Absolutely, right away. I knew it. And only because I knew if I didn't know about Sousa Mendes, then many other people didn't know too.
And then you interviewed a couple of people before you left on the trip, is that correct?
That's correct. And I went to California and here in New York. I interviewed some people before we went there, and then we met in Paris, and from Paris we moved to Bordeaux, Bayonne, and then to Lisbon.
So it sounds to me like this was your normal procedure for doing a documentary film.
I wouldn't say so. It was much more difficult than my previous films because I never knew where we will be at the moment, what kind of lighting, who is going to speak, what the message, what people I have to interview for, what should I do, what about the sound, what about logistics. Everything was, I have to make decisions right on the spot. For instance, in Bordeaux, when we went to see the office, Sousa Mendes' office,
The consulate.
Where he issued a visa. It was a narrow stair case, and it was very crowded with the people. So I had to elbow myself forward and took a position a floor above to take meaningful shots. Or when we came to Figueira da Foz in Portugal, where I thought I have a little bit of time to relax, then I was informed that the group of Portuguese people came with some documents. They heard about our trip, and they came to see us, and they brought some documents. And one of the members of the group, Lee Sterling, particularly, they were looking for him because they had the papers with the names of his entire family on the paper from 1939, 1940. And he didn't know that. And when he came and they showed him these pictures, and then they told him they know where is that house he lived there when he was 4 years old. So I had to do it right away. I have to make a decision that I have to have a camera, I have to have a light, I have to have microphones, and who is going to talk, where to stay, where to position myself. And then, of course, when everything was ready, you can tell about these people you met.
Oh, the Malafaia family.
The Malafaia family. You can tell better about that.
Well, I knew that I was going to meet the daughter of Alberto Malafaia, who was the gentleman who was so kind to my parents when they were in Figueira da Foz for 18 months, longer than any other refugees, mostly the longest refugees in Portugal. But in any case, Simon, I want to thank you for bringing us into your process. And most of all, on behalf of the Sousa Mendes Foundation, I would like to thank you for making this film.
No, thank you for allowing me to make this film.
Well, we're both thankful. In any case, now we're going to turn to Dr. Mordechai Paul Dio. And Mordechai, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Thank you.
It's great that you're here with us today because we know you're busy preparing lectures. You're still teaching at Yeshiva. Is it Stern College of Yeshiva?
Stern College.
And Toro in the summer. So we're very happy that you're here. In any case, Mordechai, you are the man with the deepest and most varied knowledge, I think, that we know of Sousa Mendes. So how would you like to enlighten us today about Sousa Mendes?
Well, thank you for having me. I came to Yad Vashem in November 1982 as head of the Department of the Righteous Among the Nations, as we call it in Hebrew, Chasidei Umot HaOlam. And I studied a lot of the files and I wrote about new cases. And then after 2 years, I came upon the story of Sousa Mendes. And I read about it and I was astounded. This is the greatest story of rescue that Professor Yehuda Bauer once termed it the greatest rescue story by a single individual during the whole of the Holocaust. And I was asking myself why nobody's talking about this. This is 1984, 1985. Now I opened the file and I read that the story begins actually in 1959 when his daughter, Joanna Mendes, she called herself Mendes, not Sousa Mendes, in New York, wrote to a certain Mr. Dijour in Hayes and asked him what can be done to bring the story of Sousa Mendes into greater prominence, either by a movie or a book. She mentioned Herman Wouk, maybe he would like to write about this. And she met Rabbi Kruger in 1959. This is the rabbi, later on I'll mention him, but not now, but who told her about his meeting with Sousa Mendes in Bordeaux. Well, letters went back and forth, and they even wrote to someone at Warner Brothers. And in 1960, by the time the year 1960 came to an end, nothing happened. No book, no movie, because the scriptwriter was busy with something else, something more important, things like that. So this is in 1960. In 1960 at Yad Vashem, we still didn't have the program of the righteous Gentiles. It was launched in 1963. But then in the 1964-65, Joanna Mendes, together with others, turned to Yad Vashem. And the story became known to Yad Vashem. And again, Rabbi Kruger wrote a very beautiful, long account of what happened in Bordeaux between him and Sousa Mendes. He had already written about this, a very short thing in a Yiddish newspaper called Der Tug, which appeared in August 1941. He arrived in New York in May or June, so right away, a little bit later, it appeared. It didn't mention the name of the Sousa Mendes. Maybe it did mention in the Yiddish press, they didn't know how to write it down in Yiddish. But he wrote about the story. And now again, he wrote a long story to Yad Vashem in 1966. And Yad Vashem declared him to be a righteous among the nations. A certificate and a medal were sent to the Israeli Consul-General in New York, Michael Arnon, and he invited the members of Sousa Mendes, the children, those that were there. Okay, he had 13 or 14 children, and they were there, and the rabbi, and he presented them with the certificate of honor and the medal. They took some snapshots, which we have in the file. And that was in 1967. And then there was nothing further happened, but then in 1970 or 69, Joanna Mendes came across an article in a certain magazine where they lauded Salazar that he had saved Jews during the Holocaust. So she wrote to Yad Vashem, and she wants to make sure that we're not going to honor Salazar as a righteous among the nation. She got a nice letter from the head of the commission, Justice Moshe Landau, saying, don't be afraid, we're not going to honor this man as a righteous among the nation. This is 1970. And here I am in 1984, that's 14 years later. And I was wondering, where's the tree for him? How come nobody came to plant a tree? Every righteous is entitled, either he or someone in his family or even the survivors, to come and plant a tree. But no one comes, no one is asking. In the file, there were several survivors who had testified. There was a Mrs. Rolin, Mr. Elias. These were the only two people that testified on his behalf. As Jews, there were others like the Crown Prince of Austria and so on. And I said to myself, we need to have a tree for Sousa Mendes in a place, in a dignified place, not down the hill where people would have to use ropes to get to the tree. And so I gave the order to the maintenance to plant a tree, although I was not allowed. And a tree in a location where people could arrive very comfortably and gather and do something, you know, and say, have a little ceremony. So I planted the tree, and then I said, I have to make the story known. It had never been published in the Israeli press. And so in 1986, I wrote a long article, and I sent it to the Jerusalem Post, the article, and it appeared over 2 pages. The title, they gave the correct title because, as I pointed out, he defied orders from his government. We honored a lot of diplomats, but there's not one diplomat that we honored that openly defied orders in such a way like he did. When he was told, Circular 14, he was told, don't issue visas to Jews. And he did issue visas to Jews. Other diplomats that we honored, they may have been told, don't issue too much or don't make sure that they have enough money in this, but there was no straight no, like in the case of Sousa Mendes. That article appeared in 1986. A little while later, a man came from New York, Robert Jacobowitz, who heard about the story. He came to ask to verify with me whether the story is actually, you know, true. And then we began to work together. In 1986, Salazar had died in 1970. The situation in Portugal was beginning to change, and we worked together and with others to have the Portuguese government annul the conviction of Sousa Mendes, restore him to the ranks of the diplomats in the Foreign Office, and restore to his families all the benefits, the severance benefits, the pension benefits that have been denied to him. And there was a momentous moment, I believe it was in 1995, correct me if I'm wrong, Olivia, when the parliament in Lisbon stood up, all of them, and unanimously voted to restore Sousa Mendes to the ranks of distinguished diplomat. There are still some issues there with the home that has to be restored. The home is in a very bad condition and so forth. Now I want to get to the other story that I was fascinated, and that is the story of Rabbi Chaim Kruger. Rabbi Chaim Kruger, a Hasidic rabbi who had never met Mendes before. He was born in Poland, but lived in Belgium. And when the Germans invaded in Belgium, then he fled with thousands of others into France, thousands of others, including me and my family. Okay, but we never tried to get to Spain. And then he arrived in Bordeaux with the Germans in hot pursuit of what was left of the French army. And in Bordeaux, these thousands of Jews were parked on the street next to the great synagogue. And they wanted to cross. They wanted to get to Lisbon. Everyone wanted to get to Lisbon, because in Lisbon, everybody hoped that they could catch a boat and go someplace across the Atlantic, either the United States or some of the Latin American countries or elsewhere. And what struck me in the story is that in the story, which has been told by several people, one day, Sousa Mendes, driving in his car, was passing the place where these thousands of Jews were parked, and he saw a man with a long beard and a black hat and a black coat, and he stopped. He told the driver, stop the car, and he went over. He called over this man, and the man identified himself as Rabbi Kruger, and he said, who are you? How are you? He said, I'm here with my wife and 5 children. Well, don't you hop in the car with your family and come over to my place? I want to talk with you. Now that's already very strange. Sousa Mendes was a devout Catholic, but why would he stop and pick up a man and take him to the consulate? But he took him, and there, according to what the rabbi testified, Sousa Mendes asked him about him. And he said, I came down from Belgium and so on. And then the rabbi in his testimony says that Sousa Mendes told him that he believes that he is a descendant of the Marranos. He is a descendant of those Jews 400 years before that were forced to convert or leave. So a lot of them left, and a lot of them, some converted, but they were Marranos, and he has got Jewish blood. Incidentally, I have to say this. I checked one of the letters that his daughter wrote in 1960 to Hayes, and she also confirms that. She said that her father believed that he was a descendant of Jews. Later on, I'll read that passage from the letter that his daughter wrote. But anyway, he said that I'm there with all the Jews on the street and we want to get to Portugal, but for that we needed transit visas, so they'll allow us to cross into Spain on the way to Portugal. Sousa Mendes at the beginning said, I'm terribly sorry, I can't do that because I have strict orders not to do that. The rabbi in his testimony then said that Sousa Mendes also said, in your case, I can try to make an exception, you and the family. The rabbi didn't know that even in his case, he was not allowed to do it. But anyway, the rabbi said, I'm sorry, I'm not going to leave all these others outside and this and simply, take off. I'm a rabbi, and either I go with the others or thank you. Now, according to the testimonies of the rabbi's daughter and also one of the sons of Sousa Mendes, the rabbi did not leave immediately, but he stayed there for many, many hours, deep in the night, secluded with Sousa Mendes. And they were talking with each other. And the rabbi was trying to convince Sousa Mendes to disobey his own government, to the point that the assistant consul came in and overheard the conversation. They were talking in French with each other. The rabbi comes from Belgium, he knew some French, and Sousa Mendes knew, of course, through French. And the assistant consul came in and he said, sir, don't you know Circle of 14? You can't do that, sir. You are risking your status. And the rabbi, in his testimony, says, I urge the ambassador, not to listen to his assistant. Very strange, okay? I said to myself, it's like a person who comes to a bank and asks for a loan, and the banker doesn't know whether to give him a loan. And then the assistant banker comes in and says to the banker, don't give him the loan, don't give him the loan. And the banker decides he's not going to listen to his assistant, and he gives them the loan. Very strange behavior. Because the person does not qualify to get such a large loan. Anyway, after these many hours that stretched in the night, no one knows when exactly, but Mendes then either he secluded himself. We don't know for sure, there are different versions. But in a little while, a day or two, he made a decision. Everyone standing outside and everyone who needs it gets the transit visa of Portugal that allows that person's family to cross into Spain. But I need help. So I can't do it alone because there are hundreds of people standing outside waiting in line. He asked his son to help him out. And then the rabbi said, I'll help out too. He came back, that's the next day or 2 days later, we don't know for sure. And the rabbi is sitting there in the consul's office with the seal of the consulate and stamping the transit visa seal on the passports of people or whatever documents. This is a Hasidic rabbi who suddenly becomes himself a rescuer. And this took, this lasted at least the whole day. So it's very strange. And then, of course, the story of in Bayonne, where Sousa Mendes goes ahead. Sousa Mendes, he became possessed by this story. He decided he's going to save, not only in Bordeaux, he's going to go to Bayonne. He heard in Bayonne, the assistant consul there was making trouble and not giving the visas because he had instructions from the government. And he went there and he ordered him. He said, I'm still your boss and so on. And then the story at the border where he helped them to cross the border illegally when some of the Spanish border guards who had already received instructions from their government not to allow these people where the Sousa Mendes said. And then he came there personally and somehow he talked himself into it. They opened the gate and they crossed. And later on, he met Rabbi Kruger again in Lisbon. And Rabbi Kruger said that Mendes told him he was fired, dismissed, penalized, etc., but he has no regrets. And then the statement that he made is so many Jews can suffer because of one Catholic. In other words, Hitler was a Catholic. So many Jews can suffer from one Catholic. It's okay for one Catholic to suffer from many Jews, meaning himself. I don't regret what I did it out of love. These are the words of Rabbi Kruger that he remembered, it's penned in his memory, and that he wrote in his testimony. It's a fascinating story from various accounts, from historical accounts, psychological accounts, religious accounts. Later on, I was very glad that the story came to light and he was celebrated. I just want to end by saying, what prompted Sousa Mendes to throw caution to the wind, to throw his career? He was not far from retirement after a long diplomatic career. He had been stationed in San Francisco, in Zanzibar, in Brussels. He was all over the world. And he was not a liberal, he was a conservative. Politically, he was a monarchist. He wanted the restoration of the monarchy. In other words, to remove Salazar and have a monarchy like it was before the revolution that had taken place in Portugal. So, but there's something that prompted him. I don't know, no one knows, and Sousa Mendes is not with us, and even his children don't know. It's possible, maybe he felt, I'm going to read to you that passage from her letter of Joanna, which she wrote to that highest employee in 1960. She says the following: many years before World War II and the events that took place at Bordeaux in 1940, I heard my father talking very often about the Jewish people with great admiration, how intelligent they were, and how very sure he was that we were descendants from Jewish families who once lived in Portugal, and that we should be very proud of it. That's her words. Maybe, who knows, in the back of his mind, he said, maybe I want to make amends from what my people did to the Jewish people 400 years ago. Who knows? I don't know. But I know from my work with the righteous that all the righteous that saved Jews, it happened under the following condition. There was this confrontation between the would-be rescuer and the fleeing Jew. There's an eye-to-eye contact. These are not people who decided to help Jews from a distance. They were looking into each other's eyes. And each rescuer that we honored, whether it's Oskar Schindler or anyone else, that person knew that his decision could make a big difference. He knew, if not me, then who else? This is not something where you can say, I can't help you, but you know what? Go over there, next block, somebody else will help you. It's either me or no one else. And he saw these distraught people, and all they wanted was to get to Lisbon, not necessarily to stay in Lisbon in Portugal and to be a burden to the Portuguese government welfare, but simply to continue on their journey. And he said, if I can do it, I will do it because nobody else is going to do it. And the Germans are about to enter the city of Bordeaux, which they did a week later. Because when he decided to do this, that was the moment when France capitulated, asked for an armistice. The war was over, Germany had won, and the German army indeed entered Bordeaux. But most of these people with the visas were out, and they were on the way in Lisbon. Some of them had to stay in Lisbon a little while until they catch a boat. Rabbi Kruger stayed for months and months, and then he caught a boat. He got a visa to go to New York. A fascinating story. The lesson of this story is one man can make a big difference. One man can make a difference. No one can make such a big difference as Mendes. No one has the authority to issue visas, but everyone can make a difference depending on his station. So this is a story that must be told and retold.
Mordechai, thank you so much. I want to say, Mordechai, that you are a man who makes a difference here in our foundation. And Robert Jacobitz, who is on this call today, is also another man who made a big difference. And both of you are now members of the Sousa Mendes Foundation Board. Bravo.
Thank you very much.
I'm very happy, very happy.
Very happy to be on the board of the Sousa Mendes Foundation. I want to congratulate you, John Halpern, and Olivia Mathis, who created the foundation. And when Richie created the foundation, how many people did we have on our list of beneficiaries? 2, 3, 4, 5. Now we have several hundreds. And we have several thousand names that are listed, but we have several hundred that we have identified. So as we say in Hebrew to Olivia Mathis and the others, Kol HaKavod.
Thank you, Mordechai. Kol HaKavod to you too. Now, more Kol HaKavod, we have a beautiful cameo by Eric Moed. Eric Moed, you saw him also on our event page. He is a 3rd generation and actually also 4th generation Sousa Mendes visa recipient. Eric's grandfather opened our film today with his words, which I read to you before, and Eric's award-winning architectural project, which he called Work Towards Fairness, took center stage when our journey arrived in Cabanas de Viriatu, which and we were at the Casa do Passal, in front of the Casa do Passal, the Sousa Mendes familial home. Now, I asked Eric a question, and here he is answering that question. The question was, what inspired you to create the project? So Matt, please.
Good evening. I'm Eric Moed, architect and designer and creator of a temporary exhibition at the Sousa Mendes familial home in Cabanas de Viriato, Portugal, which you'll have seen in the film is visited by many descendants of those whom Aristides saved. I'm here tonight to speak about what motivated me to make a project at the home, at the Casa do Passal, the former home of Aristides and Angelina Sousa Mendes and his many children. The answer is quite simple and obvious. It was Aristides and Angelina and their children and their grandchildren whose actions and bravery and strength and resilience inspired me to feel the need to do a project to restore the home, which is an analog, in my view, to the family's story and honor, and need to recognize not only the actions of Aristides, but the strength of his, as I mentioned, wife and children and grandchildren. I also was inspired by the strength of my great-grandfather and great-grandmother, David and Sophie Moed, as well as my grandfather Leon and his siblings Peniel and Penina, who were little children at the time, who also had a lot of strength and resilience. I felt as I was doing this project, both designing it, which started as my thesis at the Pratt Institute in Brooklyn, New York, and fabricating it in Brooklyn, and then shipping it out and shipping myself out to Portugal to make it. I was just riding on the coattails and the strength of all of the generations that came before me. It was almost like it being in a fugue state where I just felt like I was doing what I needed to do, very much channeling in a much, much smaller way what the words of Aristides, when he felt like his conscience simply drove him to give out visas at his own peril, no matter what the consequences were. Again, this is an extremely different situation, extremely different time. Not a life or death situation, but certainly something that is extremely important to set the record straight in the history books. And I want to say one last thing about the project itself. It was always meant to be temporary. The home and itself is what needed to be restored, and we're really pleased that the restoration is moving forward and the home itself has been saved. And that is the key, because the home represents the family, and the family, as I mentioned, represents bravery and strength. And I really miss my contacts with the Sousa Mendes family, and I truly hope that this project continues to spread the word, much like the Sousa Mendes Foundation continues to do. And I should mention in conclusion how helpful they were in putting together this project, exhibition materials, and providing a lot of support throughout the whole process. So thank you very much for having me as part of the program virtually tonight, and I hope everyone had a nice Thanksgiving.
I would like to thank my co-host, Joan, to whom I will give the floor again a little later on, but right now I have some business to conduct. So number one is I want to mention Joan's book again. You all received a free link to the ebook of Joan's book. And the reason I mentioned Joan's book is it's her own family story of one family saved by Sousa Mendes. And it tells very beautifully the story of Sousa Mendes and what he did. Here you see the Angel of Bordeaux. It's a book intended for young readers, but it's very richly illustrated and could be of interest to anybody interested in history. So I just wanted to make the point that even though the ebook that we sent you is free, she is actually selling, or we, the foundation, are selling signed and inscribed copies of her book. So if you'd like a hard copy, it's well worth it, because there's nothing like an actual book, and it's quite a beautiful one. So that's the first thing I wanted to mention. Second thing I wanted to mention is about the house, Casa do Passal. So there were questions in the chat about the status of the house. So if you go to our website, sousamendesfoundation.org, you will see the navigation bar across the top of the website. And one of the buttons on that navigation bar says Casa do Pasal. If you click on that, you'll see a gallery of images showing the house from its prior state of absolute ruin to its current state, which is that the exterior of the Sousa Mendes home has been restored. The interior not yet, but at least the house has been saved. It has a new roof, it has new windows, it's been structurally reinforced. So the house itself, which was really on the verge of disappearing, there was so much damage to it. So the house itself is saved, and our hope as a foundation is that one day it will turn into a Sousa Mendes museum. So we have been collecting artifacts and stories and images and all of the contents necessary to create this museum. So one of the pillars of the foundation's mission is to raise funds for the restoration of that home. And of course, we welcome donations of any size. So that is the second thing I wanted to mention. Now I wanted to talk about upcoming programs. We have 2 more programs coming in 2020. We have next Sunday and the Sunday following. So let me tell you briefly about those programs. Next Sunday, we have a program called Women of Valor, and there we will focus on the French resistance, specifically in Paris. We're going to focus on a resistance story that featured leaders who were women. And so we have 2 speakers, Ann Nelson and Joanne Gilbert, who will tell us the story. And so we're going to have a whole series called Women of Valor. So next week's is the first installment, which is focusing on Paris. And so I urge you to sign up. It's a free program, just as today's was, and just as last week's was. The week following is a program that does require a ticket. It's our last program of the year, and we want to end the year with just having fun. And we're going to focus on Fiddler on the Roof. So the program is called Fiddler, A Miracle of Miracles. That's the name of the film that we're going to show. And you will meet in person the Yiddish Tevye, Steven Skybell, who was the star of the Yiddish Fiddler on the Roof production that recently took New York by storm. This is the 2 CD set of the cast recording of that performance, and we do have copies of this 2 CD set available. I have my own copy in my car. I listen to it all the time, and it's really something marvelous. We also have a member of the original Broadway cast, Mimi Turk, who will be with us. She played Huddle, one of the 3 daughters, and one of the other daughters was Bette Midler. So it should be quite a wonderful program. It is in place of our gala, so there are prices. There are different levels of tickets. But if you can't afford any of those prices that we propose, then we do have a benefactor who is sponsoring a free ticket to anyone who needs one. So there is no excuse for you not to sign up, and we certainly hope you will. So after today's program, you'll get an email with further information. So now let's turn to some questions from the chat box, and then I'll turn it back to Joan. So there was a question about the non-Jews that Sousa Mendes saved. So I'm wondering, Mordechai or Simon, would one of you like to talk about that? Because Simon, you interviewed one such person, and Mordechai, maybe you have comments about that as well.
Sure. I did speak this man. You probably forgot his name. He lives in Pennsylvania, in a small town.
Duvivier, John Duvivier.
Duvivier. He said that his family was not Jewish at all, and the reason why they decided to leave Belgium and move to eventually to Brazil and then to the United States, it was purely political. And there were many, many non-Jewish people. Actually, there probably were 3 times as much non-Jews who were saved and helped by Sousa Mendes than the Jewish people. So this is true, and we know in my film I showed that Salvador Dali was one of them, and royal family of Luxembourg and Austria were recipients of Sousa Mendes visa, as well as many other people from Poland, some even from the former Soviet Union were there too. So this is true. There were many non-Jews he helped. So it wasn't just an attempt to help Jewish people only. Everybody who was in trouble and fearful for his life was helped by Sousa Mendes.
I'd just like to add what Semyon said, and I agree with him. However, let us not forget a very sharp distinction. Sousa Mendes received orders that he should not give transit visas to people unless they had a permit of residence. They could stay in Portugal for some time, or they had a destination where they could go. So the royal family of Austria, they had a destination. They had a visa to go to the United States. Sousa Mendes was told that when it concerns Jews, no visas whatsoever, even if they have a destination. So there's a big distinction. Jews had to get out, and he was disobeying a clear-cut order by Salazar. No visas to Jews, even if they have a destination, even if they have a place where to stay. Whereas the others, many, I'm not saying all the others had an American visa or whatever from another country, but many of them had a place where to go. So let's not forget the distinction of these thousands of Jews that he gave the transit visa in defiance, in clear defiance of the instructions from his government.
If I may, one more thing. In 1938, the famous Evian conference was called because everybody anticipated a flow of refugees. At that conference, as an example to what just was said, Australia refused to grant any visas to the Jewish people of Europe on pretext that we don't have anti-Semitism in Australia and we don't want to have it in the future. And that's why they decided not to give visas to Jewish people.
That's right.
It was a difference between non-Jews and Jews.
Now, Dr. Paul Dio, there is a comment in the chat box having to do with the Brazilian Luis de Sousa Dantas, who has a similar name, but in his case, it wasn't visas to Portugal, it was visas to Brazil. So maybe you can briefly tell people that story.
Okay, so this man, Dantas, was honored by Yad Vashem. He was told, he was not told don't give visas to Jews, but only give visas to Jews who would benefit economically Brazil. In other words, people with money or people who would come to Brazil and open a business, and that would help out. And so the people that he helped, he reinterpreted these instructions in such a way that these people were shown that they could be of economic benefit to Brazil. But when they arrived in Brazil, the Brazilian authorities found out that this is not the story, so they wanted to punish this ambassador, but he had already resigned from the Foreign Service, and so they were not able to lay their hands on him. So he issued visas to several dozen Jews, although they were not qualified to come to Brazil. They were not the type of people with money that they could open a business and help prompt the Brazilian economy. That is the story of this Brazilian ambassador.
Okay, so there's a very important question in the chat box that I would like us to clear up. And the question is as follows. Once the Jewish refugees were in Portugal, how were they treated? The question is as follows. Did the Portuguese country treat them badly? Everyone says they were so well treated. And our questioner says she is confused. If the government didn't want to let them in, were they welcome? Were they not welcome? So I know, Joan, perhaps you can speak to that question.
Yes, I know that my parents had to show up at a Portuguese PVDE, which is secret police station, every 2 weeks or so to renew their visas. On a governmental level, I'm not an expert and I cannot speak. On a personal level, and for many other people, visa recipients we've spoken to, the Portuguese people were marvelous, marvelous, extended themselves in any way they could to help the visa recipients, the refugees. At the end, when my parents were there for 18 months, the PVDE were making lists of refugees who were still in the country, which they were planning to hand over to the Nazis. And those refugees would have been sent back to Poland. My parents were rescued at that time by the Polish government in exile, the British government, and the Joint, the Jewish-American Joint, who bound together to ship them to Paradise, the island of Jamaica in British West Indies, which also did not turn out to be such a paradise, but in any case, they escaped that fate. And I have in my book references every so often to the Jewish Telegraphic Agency, which gives actual real documentation to supplement my mother's testimony that I'm going to talk about in a minute, and also those letters from the ghetto, that the Warsaw Ghetto, that I have in my book that my mother gave to me in 1997. So
and
question,
Joan, your book is a perfect example of how each family's story, that for a family to have a successful exodus, usually one miracle was not enough. So encountering Sousa Mendes typically was not enough. One needed miracle after miracle to have a successful exodus. So how improbable that any of us are here.
I would like to add something about Portugal. Salazar was playing a very studious foreign policy. He did not align himself fully with Nazi Germany. If you look on the map where Portugal is located, it's much closer to England than to Germany. And Portugal had an empire, it had colonies. If he had closed an alliance with Nazi Germany, the British would have taken over Mozambique, Angola, and some of the other Goa and so on. And Portugal is relatively a weak country compared to Great Britain. So he was playing, he wasn't so sure that Germany was going to win the war. And therefore, Portugal and England have a long history of collateral good relations. And therefore, once the Jewish people came to Lisbon, they were well treated, even by the authorities and by the people themselves. They were allowed to extend their stay. They were immediately told, you have to get out or else. Okay. Rabbi Kruger stayed there for 8 or 10 months. The Lubavitcher Rebbe stayed there for many months until he got a visa to go to America. The Lubavitcher Rebbe, Menachem Mendel Schneerson. And a lot of Jews stayed there, and some Jews stayed there permanently, even after the war. They settled in Portugal. So Salazar was very Machiavellian, and he kept Portugal out of the war, and he kept the Portuguese colonies. So there was a lot of politics involved in the attitude of the Portuguese authorities vis-a-vis the Jewish refugees who were stranded. He allowed the Joint to have an office in Portugal. He allowed other Jewish organizations to operate out of Lisbon. Money from the Joint that went to Jewish communities in Europe passed through Lisbon. Packages to the Warsaw Ghetto, when the Warsaw Ghetto was still in existence, passed through Lisbon. So you have to consider the politics involved there when discussing the treatment of Jews in Portugal.
So there's a question in the chat box which relates to what you just said, Dr. Paul Dio. And the question is, do we know how many visa recipients ended up permanently remaining in Portugal instead of continuing their transit? And I would like to answer that question because I know the answer.
Go ahead.
The answer is actually 0. Okay, there are people who did, there are refugees who did settle in Portugal, but those are all refugees who arrived prior to mid 1937. In mid 1937, the rules changed, and all of a sudden you needed a visa, you needed to fulfill all kinds of requirements. But prior to that date, in other words, from the time that Hitler assumed power in 1933, when there were a lot of refugees, to 1937, there was quite an influx into Portugal. Those people were able to settle, but our population, the Sousa Mendes visa recipients who got these visas in 1940, in May and June of 1940, they were not allowed to settle. They all were required to find someplace else to go. So for example, in Joan Arne Halpern's family's case, they had nowhere to go. They had no visas. I don't even know if they had passports. Joan, I don't know if you've ever told me.
So Olivia, you are saying that many Jewish refugees were allowed entry into Portugal up until 1937, which is a very sharp departure of what other countries like the United States they denied up till 1937. So I'm not trying to defend Salazar, but I'm saying he was playing once he was lenient, and then in 1940 the German armies were sweeping down from Belgium, Holland, France, and it looked like Hitler was going to take over all of Europe. So he turned his face towards Hitler, but later on, he allowed the Jews to stay there when he realized this is all speculation. But the fact is that the Jews who were, as Joan indicated, when they were in Portugal, they were not mistreated. They were not confined in camps. In France, Vichy, foreign non-naturalized Jews were held in camps. Gurs, Rivesaltes, Camp-des-Milles. In Portugal, they were not held in camps. They simply had to come to the police station once in a while and sign their names. There's a big striking difference here.
Absolutely, a big striking difference. But what I was saying about Joan's family was that they had to leave. They were not given an option
Oh, yes.
of settling. So even though they had no money to leave, they had no visas, they had no destination, they were eventually rescued by the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee.
And those people who came to Sweden from Denmark,
Right.
they had to leave at the end of the war. They all went back to Denmark. They could not stay in Sweden, but we still honor Sweden for allowing them in.
So
Also, if I may, in defense to Mordechai, in 1938, the same Avion conference on refugees, Avion, Portugal was not invited to that conference. Portugal was ignored, and that was a big mistake because they could be very helpful with sending people to Angola, to Mozambique, instead of keeping them in Portugal with problem with unknown will Germany attack Spain and Portugal or not. But that mistake was made. Portugal was helpful, definitely was helpful, but was not invited to attend that refugee conference in 1938.
A brief comment. In 1939, President Roosevelt, after the Evian conference, asked the US ambassador in Lisbon to inquire with Salazar to open Angola as a place for Jewish refugees. Angola has a good climate, it's underdeveloped, it has natural resources, and it would benefit the Portuguese empire and Portuguese economy to allow hundreds of thousands. Salazar turned this down because he said, I'm not interested in creating a Jewish state in Angola.
Yeah, he was afraid. He was afraid, because of unions. There will be unions. There will be too many educated people at once.
So now let me turn the program back to my co-host, Joan Arne Halpern.
Is this for the final thoughts, Olivia?
Yes, right.
So, Simon, do you have some thoughts to share with us?
Well, I have to tell you, when you think you know everything about Holocaust, you're wrong. There's much more to discover. And Holocaust is not just about people, innocent people being murdered. It's about lawyers who allowed, who passed those laws which allowed this to happen. It's about bankers who collected gold bars made out of wedding rings and tooth crowns. It's about railroad workers who allowed the train to go without any problems to concentration camps. It's about many other people, and that's also a Holocaust.
Yes, Simon, I think we agree with you. Mordechai, your thoughts?
Okay, I just want to mention that this year, after hard work, myself and the foundation, we finally had Jerusalem municipality agree to dedicate a square near Yad Vashem in the name of Sousa Mendes. We were going to have a big celebration, but because of the virus, we had to postpone it, and we'll probably have it later on. And I also worked with the Lubavitcher Rebbe in Lisbon, because Rabbi Kruger, after he came to New York, he was very close to the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And I sat with Rabbi Rosenfeld, and he decided to dedicate his shul outside of Lisbon. And there was the avenue leading into the shul. It's called the Sousa Mendes Avenue. And inside the shul, I think he's got a room dedicated to Rabbi Chaim Kruger. So I'm very happy to tell that. And my final thing is, Mendes said, I'd rather be with God against man instead of being with man against God. When he said that he doesn't want to be with man against God, he didn't mean all human beings. He meant people like Salazar and this. So I want to end, there was a passage in our Talmud which says, which means, that's a passage by Hillel. In a place where there are no men, try to be a man. In other words, if I were to say this in Yiddish, in the place where there are no Menschen, try to be a mensch, try to be a good person. Try to be a mensch, even if you are a small person and you're not a distinguished person. Try to be a mensch, morally speaking, in those places where there are no men. And this is something I believe that Mendes had in mind when he said, I would rather be with God against man. In other words, I would rather be with God in a situation where there are no Menschen. I would rather be a mensch. With that, I'm ending my observation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mordechai. It's always special, always special. Now, I get a chance to say a few words also, and my thoughts are about my mother. In 1989, on New Year's Day, when my brother and I sat her down to receive her testimony, she spoke for 2.5 hours, and she told me everything about her days before the war with her beautiful family, and even the good times in Belgium, and then about her escape, never once mentioning my sister's name. I only found that out in 1997, 2 years before she died, when she gave me a slim album with all her pictures. That's one of my thoughts. And my second thought is this: the Sousa Mendes Foundation's journey on the road to freedom has changed my life. It's brought me an opportunity to know people who should have been my cousins, because I never had any cousins in the United States. I felt so close to each one. I was on the 13 journey and the 16 journey. And on the 16 journey, 2016, I met Stefan Rosenfeld, Zichrono Levracha, which means his name should be a blessing, who passed away this year from COVID. A beautiful, happy, wonderful man whose grandfather had a shop next door to my grandfather's shop on Piotrkowska Street in Łódź. And then I also have met Olivia Mattis, and I have met her mother, Noemi Mattis, who was born, who was whose mother was living in Belgium and went home to Lodz to give birth to her daughter, Noemi, and they were born on the same street, Alea Piershegomaya in Łódź. How do you find people like that except with the Sousa Mendes Foundation, Journey on the Road to Freedom? Also, I just want to say, teachers, when we have a new journey, please sign up. We need you to tell this story. Thank you very much.
And I realized that we didn't really say anything about the journey itself. So Journey on the Road to Freedom is one of the Sousa Mendes Foundation's signature projects. It's something that we have been doing numerous times. It's a trip, which of course we can't do in a pandemic situation, but the trip, it's a 10-day trip through France, Spain, and Portugal, beginning in Bordeaux and ending in Lisbon, retracing the footsteps of the refugees of 1940 and of Sousa Mendes himself. So as Joan mentioned, we did it in 2013. That's when Simon Pinchasov came along with us. We did it in 2016, 2017, 2019. We were supposed to do it this year. It was canceled. We don't know when we're going to be able to do it next. But if you are interested in signing up for a future trip, we particularly encourage Holocaust educators, but it is open to the general public, so anyone can sign up. You'll find information on our website. Again, on that navigation bar across the top of our website, sousamendesfoundation.org, there's the word projects. So if you go under projects, there's a drop-down menu and you hit Journey on the Road to Freedom. It'll give you all the information. There's also a sign-up sheet, so don't send a deposit or anything, but if you fill out that sign-up sheet, we'll know that you're interested and we'll keep your information on file and we will reach out to you when we are able to schedule it again. So we've run significantly over time. I would like to thank my co-host, Joan Arne Halpern, our speakers, of course, Mordechai Paul Dio, Simon Pinchasov, Eric Moed by video. I would like to thank all of you for spending an hour of your Sunday with us, and we hope to see you again next Sunday for our next program. So have a wonderful rest of your day, everybody. Bye-bye.